Good morning. We're in the West. You're supposed to say good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and Senator, thank you for putting this on, and to the Montana Chamber Foundation and all the sponsors. It certainly is a timely conversation that we need to have. Before we get into that, I thought, one of my fondest memories as a child was the minute school was out, jumping in the car with my mom and driving and seeing all the different national parks. And our favorite with repeated visits was Yellowstone. And so about a dozen years ago, I said to my husband, it's time for us to do it with our families. So we got all of our families together. We didn't drive because now we live on the East Coast. And came and rented a house not too terribly far from where you had your construction business, a place in between Bozeman and Livingston, and had a wonderful time seeing the parks. And one day we were floating down one of your incredible rivers with the entire family aboard, and our guide was this strapping young gentleman, senior in college. And I said, so you grew up here, what does your family do? And he said, well, ma'am, we're in the ranching business. And I said, well, that's very interesting. I said, if you don't mind me asking, how many acres do you have on your ranch? And he says, 20. I'm thinking, well, this is a pretty small ranch. And later on, I come to find out that's the Montana humble way of saying 20,000 acres. And I have to recalibrate myself when I get here. We were here 2 years ago to take my children on their first fly fishing trip. And I was on the phone with the outfitter, and I said, all right, well, we'll be there at 6 tomorrow morning. About how far away are you? He goes, oh, we're just on the other side of the ridge. I'm thinking we get up at 5, we're there by 6. I said, just so I know, about how long do you think that'll take me? He goes, well, how fast do you drive? I'm thinking, I don't know, 60. He goes, oh, about 3 hours. So you got to recalibrate when you get to Montana. Everything's big sky, big time out here. By the way, I did buy a place between Bozeman and Livingston, a little piece of property. I wish I could vote here. It might mean something rather than where I vote in Washington, D.C. And I, too, have 20 acres. Really 20 acres. So I'm a neighbor and a good friend of Montana. What I thought I would do, and hopefully I can get it to work. Maybe it's not on. It is on. We'll go forward somewhere. Oh, now we're too far forward. Let's go back. Are you guys going to advance it back there, or am I going to do it? There we go. That's who I am. We already have figured that out, so let's move on. I want to build from the future to the present, so we get an idea of where we're heading in energy, and then maybe have a discussion about what we should be doing differently to achieve what we know we need to accomplish. Look, by the middle of this century, that's 2050, that's just under 35 years from now, we're going to be a completely different planet. We are going to add 2 billion people to this planet, and 7 of those 9 billion people are going to be living in cities that require energy, cities that require people to have jobs and afford that electricity. Energy demand is going to go up by as much as 85%, and the world's GDP, if we're lucky, is going to go up by about 250%. And you look at the call for electricity services of almost 150% expansion. That's in 35 years. That's an astronomical change. That is a reason why all forecasters, including myself, when we tell you what we think is going to happen, are going to be dead wrong. Because we have no idea what the call on commodities, resources, services are going to be in a world that adds 2 billion people and has so many more cities and a growing and healthy economy around the world, with countries like India and China having industrialized by that time. So let's bring it a little bit forward to 2040. We know that electricity demand, according to the International Energy Agency, is going to go up by over 50%. What's different now is where that demand is coming from. It's coming from the developing world, not the developed world, not us, not Europe, not Japan, but the Indias and Chinas and South Asias of the world. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute. Electricity demand is still the hottest commodity as people are seeking to electrify their cities and their manufacturing bases. Yet we still see over 1.5 billion people that have no access whatsoever to modern energy services. And if that energy poverty gap were to close, which I think we would all want to see close for the quality and health of people around the world, the call on energy will be even greater than what we are looking at today. And it's going to take a heck of a lot of money. even by US standards, to meet this energy demand growth, about $40 trillion of money to be invested in the energy system worldwide between now and 2035. The question for us here is how much of that money is going to come here? Where is that money going to come from? Are we competitive for those investments? Are we making it easier or harder to invest here? Is it easier to invest here in Montana, or is it going to be Mongolia? We have to look long term because that's where capital is looking. What decisions we make today will affect the outcome of this tomorrow. On the left-hand part of your slide is the developed world, and the right-hand part is the developing world. You can see that demand growth, that blue part, is clearly not in the developed world. It's in the developing world. China is the world's largest energy consumer today, and that will never change. We're not planning to catch up. They are growing, and they are growing even slower than they were a couple of years ago, but they're still growing much faster than we are. We look at India on there, and I'll tell you a little thing about India. India today has 400 million people with no access to electricity. 400 million people. That's more than the combination of ours and Germany's population. And if you don't think that's a high priority for the Indian government, you're dead wrong. Energy is job number one for that government, and they are going to be investing in every resource, every continent, every technology going forward. What's interesting, and you can't really see in this slide, is the Middle East. And we've been through Arab Spring, Arab Winter, we have no idea what we're in, frankly. Let's be honest. But we do know there's tectonic changes. And what that has meant on the energy front is a couple of things. Number one, the rulers of the energy resource-rich countries of the Middle East are spending more of their investments in their countries to raise the quality of life, keep people off the streets, find new jobs, find new industries, diversify their economy. So more of their molecules are staying in their own countries, and they need to find new consumers to sell their products to, and it's not us. We're producing more here at home. Our economy is flat. It is not Europe. It is Asia. And so you're looking at a world oil and gas market that used to be defined by OPEC, frankly, and the Middle East, and us. We were the demand, they were the supply. Now there's a whole lot more suppliers on there, and they're looking for their next consumer, and their consumer is now Asia. So you're looking at that entire center of gravity of OPEC in the Middle East, looking away from us and looking toward Asia. And that is a huge change for the world's global oil market. We'll talk about how we're going to be impacting that in a minute. But if this conversation were happening in 2005 rather than 2016, we would be asking the center to open the bar early, because we were looking at a time when we were looking at dramatically reduced natural gas supplies in this country. We didn't foresee any increase, in fact, a huge increase in our own supply, a huge increase in imports from around the world, especially OPEC. And if this scenario were playing out right now in 2005, it would be a huge problem for the United States of America. But we are in a different place. We are looking at a world in which we are the world's #1 holder of resources in the world. And that means we have tremendous more opportunities to advance our economic interests, to reduce our trade balances, to use our abundant resources here. As Matt Rose says, we now have the chemical industry moving from all over the world into the Gulf of Mexico. The fertilizer industry is moving from the Middle East back into the Midwest. The steel industry is back in areas in Pennsylvania and Ohio that were left for dead. This is affording us opportunities to transform our economy in ways not previously ever envisioned. So if we go back here, I just want to look at what the world looks like in 2040 again. And you can look at the dinner table. The dinner table is set with nuclear, renewables, natural gas, coal, and liquids. And if you look at all of their chairs grow, but they become slightly different sizes. But for anyone who wants to say that we're going to be a radically transformed world in 2040 are just plain dead wrong and don't understand our practical energy system and the huge and intensive nature of it that has been built over decades. So everybody looks a little bit different size, but nobody's been excused from the table. And this is what we look like here. It's the same story on a domestic side. We're growing. We're not growing at 30%. We're growing at more like 10% in our energy demand growth, but that's still a fairly good clip. And it will be even bigger if our economy recovers or gets healthier with better economic policies rather than the stagnant growth that we have been witnessing. And if you look at that, though, again, you look out at 2040, we still have everybody seated at the table with slightly different chair sizes. And so that means that we have to have an energy policy that recognizes that. We are not going to be able to force or dismiss any one of these resources. Should we, and the other parts of that pie don't grow, we'll be looking like we would have looked like in 2005 with the dire forecasts we're looking at. So we've got to be careful about how we craft our policies to ensure that we have this balance, this diversity, this availability upon which our economy will depend for so long. And right now, quite frankly, we have an energy policy regime in Washington, D.C. that is actively working against this. And that is a huge problem for us going forward. So the energy revolution that people have been talking about through the course of this morning, I'm old enough to remember I went to school in Houston. I was there when the oil market collapsed in the early 80s. It was devastating for that economy. You didn't drive downtown. It was dangerous. And the entire economy of Texas just collapsed. You go there today, is it pleasant? No. But certainly Houston and the Texas economy has diversified and learned its lesson. But this boom and bust cycle, if you want to call it that, is very different. And you'll hear from Ryan Lance tomorrow a little bit more about this, about why it's so different. It's different because right now we have woken up to the fact that our energy revolution isn't in Texas, Oklahoma, and Alaska, and California. It's in every single state of our country. If you are a producing state, it's because you're producing. You are part of the supply chain, or you're part of the infrastructure business. And these shale deposits are all over our country, not just in those specific states that used to be in the energy business. So every one of our 50 states has an interest in continuing this energy revolution, producing, consuming with low prices, and the supply chain, which is so vital to maintaining this energy revolution. Ironically, when you look at that map, which is already 10 times old, they can't produce the maps fast enough because we're finding more shale plays every time we wake up in the morning. And the U.S. Geological Survey just asked for a big increase in its budget, shocker, to be able to estimate these a little bit better. But what's interesting on this slide, anybody here from California? Good. All right. We're in safe territory. You look at the Monterey Shale play there in California. The Monterey Shale play is the largest potential shale play in our country. It's geographically inconveniently located for where it is, but if Governor Jerry Brown were to be able to really develop that resource, he wouldn't have to worry about all of the companies and industries that are flooding out of California and flooding to other places. They would actually be able to pay off some of their debts, their pensions, et cetera, because they would have a huge another source of revenue in California. So that's Governor Jerry Brown's inconvenient truth, that he's sitting on a huge resource that he can't quite get to yet. And even if he could, I suggest that the activists there will prohibit any further exploration of that. So everybody's in the energy business. We have to recognize that. It's not just in places like Montana that are rich in resources. The other reason that this is different is you look at the new players. You know, it's not just Texas and North Dakota, but you're seeing more and more players getting in the energy business in a big way. If you look at North Dakota, despite the downturn, and you share a basin with them, you look at the radical transformation in North Dakota with the lowest unemployment rate in our country. I would submit to you, people aren't going there for tourism. They're going there because they can find good, well-paying jobs and can afford to give their family the quality of life that they hope to. And if we're back here in several years with the pace of technological change and the pace at which we are finding new basins and resources, this list will be different. All of these will still be on there, but we'll see a lot more states that are going to be in the energy business. When the governor of North Carolina took office, the inauguration speech focused on new opportunities for North Carolina. Principal priority is get North Carolina in the energy business. Get North Carolina in the energy business, right? So there are states where this was never an option. They're now looking at being in the energy business, onshore and offshore. Whether or not they'll be able to is a little bit dependent on what the federal policy environment looks like. The story on natural gas is even crazier. When you look, and obviously this is having duress on our coal industry, if you look at the year 2000, the beginning of this century, shale gas was 2% of our supply. Today it's over 30%, and we're slated to go to over 50% by 2040. That's what other industry has changed so quickly. And don't say IT, the cell phone, because it took Steve Jobs and Apple a long time to get from what I carried in my suitcase to what you can now put in your pocket. No other industry has changed this quickly with this amount of technology. And so I'll say to you that are in the energy business, you're in the high-tech business. Talk about yourselves differently, because that really attracts a different audience, a different attention, the millennials. You are the highest tech business there is in this country. There is more high-tech development happening in Denver and Houston and Montana and Billings than there is in Silicon Valley by far and away. Take ownership of that, be proud of it, and change the conversation. So if you look at shale gas, I'll use that 2005 point again. I was in government. We had Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Anybody remember those devastating hurricanes in the Gulf? Well, I had the unfortunate or fortunate position of having to be the energy responder, not the FEMA trail lady, the energy responder. And so my job was to get the electricity back on, which was trying. It was to release oil into the global oil market, which we and 27 other countries did. It was to get all kinds of things. And I looked at the situation, and I said, here's what I know I can solve. All of a sudden, gas is $4.50. Give me 2 months, I can get that down. I can get production back up in the Gulf. I can get the pipelines moving. And I can deal the oil side, we got covered. And indeed, that did happen after being hauled in front of I can't tell you how many hearings in Congress. But we did it. We solved the oil conundrum. What was really worrisome was natural gas. In 2005, I had no options. I couldn't increase supply. There was no excess supply on the market. I watched cargoes out in the Atlantic going from Europe to the United States and turn around midway and go back because the European traders were bidding us up. I had no choices. So I found myself on airplanes going to every place you will never go on vacation, begging for natural gas. Turkmenistan in August is lovely. You never want to be in that position again. We had few choices, and natural gas prices went up to $15. We were looking at a winter where we were going to be relying on natural gas for heating in major parts of our country, and it was going to be very economic. So if we look at what's happening, though, over the course of our economic distress, our recession, it's amazing to look at the foundation of our economy is now dependent on the success of our energy revolution. Throughout the worst years of our recession, non-farm employment went down 2.5%, but the oil and gas industry's employment went up 38.5%. So I submit to you, without this investment, this increase in employment, our recession could have been a depression. I don't want to get into a macroeconomic, debate about where's the drawing line there, but quite frankly, it would have been a whole heck of a lot worse. That we can be confident of. And so that is now a part and just built into the foundation of our economy. And we're losing a lot of those good-paying jobs right now, and we can talk about what that means here in just a second. I don't know why I'm having technical problems. So look at this. What has it meant over the last 8 years? We've created more than 4 million jobs, $2.5 trillion of revenue. And Senator, being from Washington, that even captures the imagination of people in Washington, because T is a big number, it's not B. And you look at that revenue, $5 trillion worth of investment. This is not something that came out, this is not a stimulus, program that taxpayers had to pay for. This is willing industry coming to the table, risking its own capital, and making our American economy healthy again. And oh, by the way, we got to stop importing oil from people that don't like us so much and keep more of that money here. That's a win-win. And for some reason, the message that is coming out of Washington, and particularly the administration, is exactly the opposite. We've got to keep this stuff in the ground. We've got to move on to other resources. The day of fossil fuels is behind us. Well, I don't know what numbers they're looking at. I give them briefings all the time, and I swear they must have a secret statistical agency that I've never been privy to, because the numbers just don't pan out. You guys might have to give me an assist back there. All right, so what is happening right now? As we wake up, we're in 2016, we know we have more resources than any other country in the world. We know that we can now export oil by lifting the export ban. Thank you, Senator Daines. We can export natural gas all over the world. What should our policy be? When we look at where the problems are around the world, our policy should be, let's produce as much as that we can, use as much as we need to here, and export it to places around the world, particularly to our allies. Well, instead, we now have an administration policy of how to develop and where to develop our offshore resources that does the following. It shuts off all possibility until 2022 of developing resources off our Atlantic coast. By the way, that irritated beyond belief the governors of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, who wanted to be able to develop their offshore resources. It shuts off the eastern Gulf of Mexico, it shuts off the western Pacific coast, and it shuts down new areas in Alaska. Now, this doesn't sound like a country that wants to be an energy superpower. It sounds like one that is shrinking from its future, and that's not one that we can afford. Going back to 2005, nobody should ever have to get on an airplane again and try and find resource to be brought to market because we are running out, because we're not. And we can bring these resources to bear, not only for the American consumer, but for our American geopolitical advantage as well. The other telling story about what's happening, and you all know this, and don't worry about the chart, I'll tell you what it says because it's hard to see, is where all the drilling activity is happening. And you all know it here. It is not happening on federal lands. It is happening on private and state lands. It's particularly acute in the gas area, but production on federal lands for oil and gas is down. The federal government is now taking more leases off the table in the middle parts of our country and here in Utah. They now have a moratorium on federal leasing of coal on federal lands. We are moving in the complete wrong direction. Now, why are they going to state and private lands? Because you can get a permit, you can actually make a deal. You can get things done, and you can't do that with the federal government anymore. The other thing we have to be careful of is public opinion, public outcry. Right now, and it's not as intense in states that are used to energy development, but it is creeping up all across our country. Here we have 26 states that now have over 450 moratoriums on fracking. Now, some of these areas don't even have any resources, so it's just a political statement. But there is a drumbeat out there that is morphing into places that are energy rich. Denton, Texas, passing a moratorium on fracking. Places in Colorado, we narrowly escaped putting on the ballot in 2012 a statewide close to a moratorium on fracking. So this isn't just isolated to Vermont and Maine, this is creeping and growing. And the misrepresentation of the facts that we are damaging our groundwater, that we are polluting waters for our kids, that we are threatening our agriculture, that we are polluting the air and water are just simply false, and the truth matters here. But the people that are opponents of the fossil fuel and the energy revolution are conveniently using emotion to have people reject this. So a bright future is not given, even though it's being handed to us. Guys, you might have to give me a hand back there. The other thing we have to worry about is the price does matter. I mean, the industry is producing more with fewer rigs, for sure. We used to say as soon as the rigs go down, the price goes up. That's not true anymore. We're seeing a far more efficient energy industry. That's a good thing. The bad thing is we're seeing people laid off and investments delayed. But the long-term trend of this is excellent news. That means we can produce more barrels, more natural gas with fewer rigs and fewer exposures to any risks. So while this is a bad news story in the short term, it's a good news story over time and shows true American innovation. I said to somebody, this is American grit at its best. We now can produce more with better technology than anybody on this planet, and we'll get through this rough patch going forward. The other thing is that we don't live on an energy island and can command our own energy future. On the natural gas side of things, we're actually in competition. Before we were in competition for receiving resources, now we're in competition for selling them. There's a lot of big projects that are coming on stream all around the world. Australia just came on stream in the last couple weeks, the Gorgon project. 15 years in the making and 50% over budget, but it's producing. And there are new projects in Indonesia, Nigeria, I can go on and on and on, so that we gotta keep our act together here. We have to make it easy to get the permits to export natural gas. Why we even have a prohibition is a good question to ask ourselves right now. And we need to get in the business to stay in the business, because there are other people that certainly want to take that market share away from us. On the oil export side of things, as I said, since we now have lifted the oil export ban, here are the benefits from lifting that oil export ban. When you look at the reduction in the price of gasoline at the pump, you look at the new jobs that are going to be supported by lifting this ban, close to 400,000 jobs, that we're increasing our GDP by $85 billion a year, and that disposable income will then be redistributed, reinvested in our economy. This is a good news story. Why did it take us so long to figure out that this was going to be an economic engine for growth? So I tell you, this is something that is now in our rearview mirror and is here to stay, and that is a good news story going forward. However, there are some things that are problematic. This is your friendly EPA. These are just a few representative regulations they have underway to regulate the energy industry. Some are big, some are small, and if I actually was to put all of them on there, because they do have to make them public before they publish them, at least a year in advance, they would all just be little pinpricks on the slide. There are so many. There has never been a more active EPA in our nation's history than today. And interestingly enough, in their budget request, you know what department in the EPA they asked for the most increases in? The lawyers, so that they can litigate all of this, because they know industry, and especially the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, is coming right after them, because the overreach of regulating a single industry is just unbelievable. But let's just take two, and then I'm going to get down. Let's look at ozone, maybe. Ozone is the most expensive regulation that nobody knows anything about. And if you look at it here, I mean, you think, okay, let's just take Yellowstone. With the way that they have set the ozone regulation, because of the background ozone in Yellowstone will be out of compliance with the ozone regulation. Try to explain that to your kids, right? What options does Yellowstone have to reduce its ozone? So we're going to be, all those jobs we were just going to be creating by more exploration, more production, more exports, we're going to be taking away now. With the ozone regulation and reducing our GDP, reducing our jobs. And the most ironic thing about this whole thing, and in EPA's own words in their regulation, it says 60% of the reductions that we are requiring will have to be accomplished by unknown technologies. Unknown, which means that today we don't have the technology to meet this regulation. 60% of it is unknown. But that's not their problem, it's now ours. We are litigating this, a number of organizations are litigating this, but I tell you, one of the immediate implications, and this has implications here in Montana, is that if you fall out of compliance, you lose your federal highway funding. You want to expand a road from X to Y, and it requires a federal highway permit or funding, matching funding, stalled until you figure out a way to get into compliance. So they do have a hammer, and it's pretty heavy in some parts of our country. And we have gone out of compliance before. Atlanta lost 4 years of funding because they couldn't meet their ozone standards. So it's not in theory, it's real. The other one is the Clean Power Plan. You guys are the tip of the spear on this. You guys are being required to reduce the most emissions than any other state in the country, which should just make you outraged. If you look at Montana, it stands up there. Good brethren with Wyoming and North Dakota. But you have a regulation that first came out saying we're going to require you to reduce your emissions 21%. And then 6 months later, it comes out and it's 48%. We call it messy math or fuzzy math. Don't know how they got to that. We've exposed a number of problems in their modeling and their assumptions, and quite frankly, just their ambition. And we are the lead litigant, along with some of the other companies here, on suing this. We expect to have oral hearings in June. This will most definitely go to the Supreme Court. We hope it will be a Supreme Court that's in the session next time rather than this time. But this is a big deal. This affects every industry, every consumer, every family, every business, because this regulates emissions in such a way that if you cannot comply, if you want to build something, John wants to build something, he has to go shut down Sioux, because it has to be kept in balance. So you want to build something, you want to build a hospital, then you got to shut down that waste processing plant, because you got to keep it in balance. It is the micromanaging of our economy at its most fundamental level. And this is a big issue, state versus federal, of all kinds of things, whether it's in the medical community, the energy industry, et cetera. But this is a power grab to micromanage our economy at the most micro level in every single state in the country, and it's outrageous. And the Supreme Court has indicated when they stayed this rule not too terribly long ago that they were very interested in how EPA found a very interesting, hopefully, well, let me go back. I'll go forward first, if I can. Help me out there, guys. No, forward. Congress does not hide elephants in mouse holes. That was a statement from the Supreme Court. by trying to show folks that you can't just cherry pick words in a regulation to try and invent new authority. And if you look at how they've done that, and the entire 3,000 pages of the mandates that EPA has drawn its authority from, there is just 291 words they've strung together that say they have this authority. I think the courts are going to look very particular on this. And so if I can go back, I'll just show you the amount of resistance to this. We have 27 states that are directly suing the EPA over this rule, including your own. You look at all of the associations that have come together to support our litigation. It goes everything from wood to paper to steel to you name it. It's not just the oil and gas and coal industry, it is the economy. And joining in this is now 40 states, the business associations, the US chambers, the local chambers from 40 states. By any definition, that is a majority, certainly a plurality of states that are against this. This is a power grab at the federal level to try and tell us how we can live our lives at the local level and using energy as the tool in the toolbox. And we certainly shouldn't stand by and do that, because if you guys go to the next to last slide, please. This slide right here shows why we don't need to be doing it, that we have been generating more energy, more economic growth, and at the same time, we are reducing the amount of vehicle miles traveled. We are increasing our population. We are increasing our consumption. But you look at that and what's gone down? CO2 emissions, aggregate emissions. So while we've grown our economy, we're driving more, our population has increased, we're using more energy, our emissions have gone down. We're leading. And for those that say that, Europe's got the model right, well, guess what? Europe's electricity prices are 4 times what they are today, 3 times the price for natural gas, and their industries are moving here because of this. We've got it right. We don't need a huge, big mandate out of Washington to tell us how to do this. We've been doing it without that. If we do have that, those industries moving here might just turn around and move back home, which will put us on a different trajectory. And certainly, if the movement to keep the fossil fuel industry in the ground succeeds, we certainly will be in a very different place. And the last slide is there's a lot on the table. I mean, we could get complacent about this abundance, that we are the world's richest nation in terms of resources, and I mean oil, gas, coal, renewables, all. But if we're complacent, we're going to see the federal government encroach. We're going to see public outcry encroach. We're going to see all kinds of bites of this apple that could jeopardize that future. And that would have long-lasting, devastating impacts, not just on our economy, not just the quality of life of our people, but also on our national security. Because as you look what's happening around the world and what a scary place it is in the Middle East and Nigeria and Venezuela and some of the places that are major suppliers, Russia, of course, we need to be more self-sufficient and be able to find ways to assist our allies to be less dependent on those countries as well. It would give me no greater pleasure than to provide more opportunities for Europe to be less dependent on our great friend, President Putin, going forward, or being less reliant on some of the unstable places in the Middle East. And that's a role America can play. And that is the role we should play in smoothing out these big global challenges. We don't have to solve every one of them, but we need to be part of the solution. And we have the toolbox to do that. We want clean air, we want clean water, we want affordable energy, we want a healthy economy. And we can do that, and the federal government doesn't need to tell us how to do it. We are innovators. We're the American business community. We are small, large, medium-sized businesses. We're entrepreneurs. We're innovators. We can do this. We just need the government to get out of the way. Give us the permits we need. We'll abide by the laws, and let us get about our business. Thank you very much. Now, I know there are roving mics, so I'm happy to entertain all complaints, criticisms, anything, or I'm also happy to get down and let you get on to your next panel as well. I can't see a thing, so you'll have to say something if you want to say something. The mic's not on.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Great. I very much enjoyed your presentation. I think you have the right view on many, many different issues. Have you thought about what's happening, I'm sure you have, in our country now, where a number of states' attorneys general are bringing actions against major fossil energy companies simply because they haven't adopted or been quick enough to adopt the views on climate change?
Yes, and you're welcome to look at the statement that I just issued, energyxxi.org. We're going to be very, very active on this issue. The idea that a group of attorneys general can get together and decide to collaborate and cooperate to persecute not just a single company now, but an industry, because they are ideologically opposed to the product it produces, is un-American. It is a threat to the free enterprise system. It is a threat to the rule of law upon which the free enterprise system depends, and we're not going to stand for it. We're not going to take it lying down. And the idea that they are looking creatively at how they can prosecute this industry should give one pause. And so this has implications far beyond the energy industry. If it's ExxonMobil today, it'll be the energy industry as a whole tomorrow. It could be the utilities, it could be the pharmaceuticals, you name it. Everybody will be on the block. That somebody decides they don't like what you do, they're going to use the power of government and law enforcement to come after you, will provide a very chilling effect on investment in this country. And that's not just U.S. investment, but other investors coming here. If they think that they're going to be hauled up in front of the New York Attorney General just because they're in a business that he doesn't like, is hugely problematic. And I would submit that I think that people, no matter where you are on the ideological spectrum and where you are in your view of energy, they would see that as un-American. Anybody else? Yes. No. Yes?
Okay. You had made mention about the reduction of production on federal lands and even hinted that some leases have been canceled. Recently, the Department of Interior has called for the cancellation of leases in northwestern Montana. Has a new precedent been set, and or should operators be able to trust that their leases are legally binding? I mean, what's the certainty and predictability look like for production on federal lands in the future?
Well, frankly, I think it's problematic, and looking at that case in particular, which has been, those permits were granted several times over, and they creatively expanded the interpretation of some of the native lands, and then they retroactively applied that to a permit. This is legal gerrymandering to get at a point. And now we've decided, without the stroke of a pen, that we're going to put a federal moratorium on coal leasing, because we think we should study it for 3 years. We've decided we're going to cancel millions of acres in Utah because there just might not be any interest. I mean, this is subjective rather than objective. Yes, the answer is yes. When you receive a permit from the federal government, you should be able to rely on that. But it's being undone in places around the country. There's a coal mine in the eastern part of our country that they retroactively went back and looked at the environmental review, the environmental impact assessment, and concluded, you know what, back then we didn't know as much as we do now, so we're going to undo it and cancel your permit. And believe it or not, we sued the federal government over that, and we lost. So it's not all, the courts, while they are our last resort, are not, always going to be in our favor. It's hugely problematic. I mean, if you're going to put that type of capital at risk to develop a well, get in there and do the exploration, ultimately hope to get the ability to produce, it's a long-term capital-intensive business. And you have to be motivated that you're going to be able to rely on that profit. And the same thing is happening offshore, frankly. We have a new regulation coming into effect here in the next couple of months that's going to change the way that companies have to respond to the potential for a spill. I'm not saying they shouldn't be ready, but it changes the technical aspects of it that's going to make it hugely uneconomic. And people are going to look at the Gulf, and they're going to look at other Gulfs, and they're going to say, where can I go next, rather than going here? So we're doing it to ourselves. And I think the regulators are motivated by regulating. They're not really that interested in figuring out the financial implications of some of these things. And so it is problematic. I think that, as we look forward, the next administration, whoever it must be able to give confidence to the American business community that they're going to play by the rules, whoever it is. And so we're going to stand by, whether we like it or not, we were built on a nation of laws. You can depend on them. Once you get your contract, your whatever it is, we stand by the rule of law. And that will be important going forward, because there's a competition for capital out there, and we want to be the destination. And so I do think it's problematic. I think we might win a few of these, we might lose a few of these, but we can lose a few of the battles, but we can't lose the war. All right, I see the TikTok thing telling me, oh, one more. I can try and hear you.
Hi, my name is Jimmy Hahn with the Northwest Carpenters. We've been working on this Jordan Cove liquefied natural gas export facility for many, many years to get the permitting done. It's going to be a $10 billion construction project. Recently, FERC denied a permit because they did not have a buyer for the liquefied natural gas. Well, that was about 3 weeks ago. This company now has a buyer signed on to the deal. Have you seen other incidents of this in your experience throughout the United States where FERC denies a permit because of this reason or others?
Well, and the good news is I think you have the chairman of FERC here to speak at some point throughout these next couple of days, and I encourage you to, ask him thoughtfully about how they weighed that, because if the company was willing to risk its own capital, what was the evaluation on the government side? For any of these projects are huge capital-intensive projects, and to make them economically viable, it obviously makes sense to have buyers lined up and production purchase agreements lined up so that you can go to the bank and say, I've got something against which to secure financing. My thought about that is that FERC thought, well, if you don't have any buyers lined up, you're not going to get any financing, and we're going to waste all this time and capital on giving you a permit that you won't use. They came back and proved them wrong. I think it's a lesson that, FERC is looking at the economic viability of these things, and that's one of the things they look at. That's fine. Going forward, when we're going to have so much natural gas that, you may want to be out there on spot cargoes rather than firm, supply contracts, is a different story. Look, we have, in the energy bill there is legislation that has been moving to refine the process of permitting for LNG export facilities. It's clunky. There's too many processes that are out of sequence. It could be much better streamlined, and I think that will happen. It's not a politically divisive issue. We just need to get the process right. And I think we'll get there, and there are going to be some few bumps. There's some people that were in the middle of the line that got kicked to the back of the line for some of those reasons too. So it begs a bigger question, which is our process set up for the type of resources we have and the type of market we're competing in? And if we're going to require a certified buyer for every molecule, we're going to be edged out of the spot cargo market. All right, I've got the hook. So I'm going to get off the stage, and thank you so very much.
Karen, that was great. Thank you. I wrote down some takeaways. I thought it was very instructive to see that projections going out to 2050, looking out 35 years, to see that energy demand is going to increase 84% than what it is today. And I like the illustration. It says the table is not going to look a whole lot different. It's set, just the chairs are going to be bigger. Is that there's going to be an important future for coal, for oil, for natural gas, as well as for the renewables. Also, the point of having 1.6 billion people in the world who don't have electricity today, as we think about fighting to eradicate poverty, in terms of child mortality, you need power to be able to move clean water so people can grow food and drink water that doesn't kill them, and how important it will be for expanding energy around the world. And lastly, Karen, I appreciate you calling this now a high-tech summit, so maybe we need to rebrand this. We're going to call this the Montana High-Tech Summit, where there's a whole lot more high-tech innovation going on, certainly in areas around Montana and around the energy industry, than there is even in Silicon Valley. I think that was helpful perspective. And let me lastly say this, as again, coming back to the Energy Committee, as we've been battling and trying to remove that ban on oil exports. You realize after the president removed the ban on Iranian oil exports, there was one nation left in the entire world that had a ban on oil exports, dating back to 1975, that was the United States. And I can't tell you what a battle it was to lift that ban, not to mention trying to get LNG exports moving forward. And I'll just say this without making this too much of a political comment. When I sit on the dais in the Energy Committee, I look across Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders on the other side. I will just tell you there are two different views on the Energy Committee about the future of energy in this nation.